controller. You know, the way we represent games, the way we saturate colors and things are very subtly informing the player. You know, these are the important nouns of the game because they're a little bit more saturated, a little bit more distinct than the trees and the backgrounds here. These are the important verbs, the things that animate on the screen, have a high pixel delta. And adjectives, you know, are fairly apparent as well. And so a game player, in some sense, is deconstructing a scene like this and thinking of it in kind of a higher level, more linguistic sense. Now, in any game, in fact, simulation design in general, I tend to think in terms of really two overall things. Number one is its structure. You know, what are the parts of a system? You know, the actual concrete nouns involved. And then there are dynamics. What are the changes in that structure over time? That could be the way the parts interact. It could be the natural life cycle of whatever that structure is. It can be catastrophic failure. Now, as a game designer, I have kind of these Legos in my mind that I use. The language as a designer that I use involves, first of all, topology, which really, what is that structure? What is it made of? Then the dynamics. What are the changes over time that can occur to that structure? And how do you put these two things together? What are the rules over which you can actually kind of moderate the interaction between the two, what I call paradigms? So in some sense, as a designer, these are kind of like my Legos that I think of, especially when I'm trying to reverse engineer, you know, reality. You know, I'm trying to deconstruct reality, and this is roughly how I tend to parse it out. In some sense, they're like my Legos, that I can take these different parts, combine them in different ways to create new simulations, new reductions of reality. The topologies, you know, can be functional topologies, spatial, time-based, whatever. You know, it could be, you know, the choose your own adventure thing in the book. You know, basically the topology of the player's traversing. It could be the topology that's physically on the screen, the spatial layout of the way things interact. Now, a lot of games can actually be classified by how rigid the topology is. A game like SimCity has a very rigid topology based on layers. A game like The Sims is a much more flexible, you know, really agent-based topology. The primary, you know, things in The Sims are the agents that flow around and have very flexible relationships. Even within a game like SimCity, you can kind of say, you know, the buildings really, in some sense, are agent-based. They are individual little things. The networks are really kind of these network-based things like roads, infrastructure, etc. And then things like, you know, pollution, crime maps are really layer-based. And so even within a single game, you have collections of all these different topologies. Now, dynamics, I don't have time to go through all of this stuff in the talk today, but just to kind of give you some sense of it, each one of these dynamics is, as a designer, a way I think about the way these structures might change over time. Just to take one, you know, the top one in particular, propagation. You know, this can be propagation of material, information, patterns, almost anything. It's movement of something over the course of the game. It can be, you know, people moving materials through a resource game. It can be information moving. Not just through the game itself. It might even be information moving through our community. A lot of times the way we release cheat codes, the whole point of that is the way that that information propagates through our fan community. And that propagation through the community causes the community kind of become more resilient and a little bit more cohesive. A lot of people come to the website, in fact, to find out what the cheat code is. They find out what the cheat code is, but they also kind of, for the very first time, meet the community and find out that there's other information there. And they start hanging around and contributing. And so, in some sense, the cheat codes really are just bait to get people to come online, meet other people, connect to the community, and then long-term become a part of that community. And so just realizing that propagation is one of the things in our tool set is kind of a way for a designer to look at these dynamics, not just within the game, but across the entire, what we call metagame as well. Propagation can occur through networks, across landscapes, etc. But, and that's just one dynamic of many, you know, that can propagate through a medium or through time. In some sense, really, the player's decisions in the game are propagating through time. That branching tree I showed you of the possibility space is the player basically having their causal interactions propagate through the course of the possibility space, and then be able to return back to that now spot and try a different path through the light cone. Now, the paradigms really are how you take these two things, the topologies and the dynamics, and what language do you use to deconstruct reality through these. And paradigms, and this is more in the realm of simulation. Games are built, you know, in my situation, a lot on top of simulations. I'll build simulations first of interesting systems and find interesting ways to playfully interact with those and influence them. But step one is I'm taking some aspect of reality that I want to simulate and then figuring out how to deconstruct and build a model of it. These paradigms are very much based upon kind of what was the interesting technology of the time. You know, kind of And the way to look at paradigms is the fact that none of these are right. Each one of these is a different way of deconstructing the world, or looking at the world and taking it apart into various pieces. Science is very much like that. We have quantum mechanics, which is, very good at describing very small scale phenomena. We have relativity theory, which is very good at describing the universe at a very large scale, but they're incompatible. They don't talk to each other. Not even one of these is correct. We have one that's great at, describing small things, one that's great at describing large things, but neither one of these can describe a duck adequately, which is really the interesting part of reality. So it doesn't mean that quantum mechanics is wrong or reality or the relativity is wrong. They just happen to be paradigms that work in their domain pretty well, and outside their domain, they kind of break down. They make no sense. Now, cybernetics was one of the very earliest kind of control theories. Basically, how can we mimic the autonomous nervous system of a real agent? And they were used for things like control systems. A thermostat's a good example. Basically, it knows it's too hot, so it cools things off. It's too cold, it goes back. So basically, it's an automatic governor. Cybernetics was used a lot in early things like autopilots and control systems, governors, etc. And these simple nervous systems were ways to achieve automatic control by chaining them together. They get much more elaborate behaviors by chaining these things together, which led to the very first analog computers. And in fact, the very first elaborate, kind of general-purpose computers were analog. They were not digital. They were very hard to manage, etc. But it also became kind of the very first paradigm for simulation, in some sense. A guy named J. Forrester, back in the 50s, came up with this idea of system dynamics, which is the idea that you can simulate anything by thinking in terms of what are the stocks and flows. In some sense, these are like the nouns and verbs of the system dynamics. But you can build elaborate simulations, and it really is kind of built upon the whole idea, almost chemical processing. If you think, that you can resolve any aspect of the world into kind of a refinery model, that is system dynamics. In fact, a lot of very interesting simulations were done of the world using system dynamics models. One of the outputs of this was a book back in the 60s called Limits to Growth. Actually, it was the early 70s, where they were building a model of the entire world, food production, energy consumption, population growth, etc. And they ran this model, and it predicted, around 1970, the entire world economy would collapse in 1986. And, it turned out that there were just a couple of little terms that they got wrong. They didn't see the Green Revolution coming, and a couple other little factors that over time were amplified to make huge swings in the model that didn't occur. And this is our very first inkling into the idea of chaos theory. The fact that certain systems are inherently unpredictable over certain periods of time because of the chaos inherent in them. Around the same time, kind of way back, von Neumann was playing with the earliest digital computers and came up with the idea of cellular automata, which are very simple little digital systems that have homogeneous rule sets acting over a homogeneous grid. And there was true emergence coming in. How many of you have ever played with the game of life, which is this little digital... So some of you have seen this, but it's an amazing little simulation with just these little dots blinking on the screen with very simple rule sets, like, 2 rules to govern whether the dots, light up or go off. But yet, amazing little things appear in this ecosystem, and they move around, and they have behaviors and physics. And people have spent, just untold hours studying this ecosystem. And the behavior that comes out of it is not really encoded in the rules. It emerges from the rules in almost this kind of spooky sense. And so the power of emergence was discovered in studying cellular automata that we still make use of today. In fact, a lot of SimCity is based upon very, very simple rule sets that, when you unfold them, they lead to very complicated behavior, very, counterintuitive, but yet at the same time, they do a very good job of mimicking reality. So in some sense, SimCity was kind of built heavily upon this idea of emergence from cellular automata. Chaos theory was something that was a little bit more recent. About 20 years ago, we started realizing that certain systems, weather systems initially, were inherently unpredictable, and we were wondering why. And chaos theory kind of uncovered that certain aspects of the world are inherently going to be unpredictable. At the same time, it also came up with a lot of very interesting ways to visualize what we call phase space, which I'm really calling possibility space. When I say possibility space in a game, all the possible states that the game can be in. The chaos version of that is phase space. And they came up with very interesting ways to visualize higher dimensional spaces and the way they may unfold and you might transition through them. And in fact, these diagrams that I was showing you about games that we're instrumenting now are kind of very influenced by the idea of kind of chaos control theory.